If you saw a rotting playground on a rainy street corner, broken swings, busted slide, beer cans in the mulch, would you spend your last 170 on it? He did. Nobody believed in it. Heck, even he didn't really believe in it. But a 5-year-old girl holding his hand looked through the fence and whispered, "Daddy, was this ever fun?" And that was enough. Mark Reynolds had never been much of a dreamer. At 38, his life was a string of practical decisions and small sacrifices. He worked double shifts at the feed store, kept receipts in his glove box, ate peanut butter sandwiches 3 nights a week so Ellie could have fresh fruit in her lunchbox. Ever since Ellie's mom passed away when she was 2, Mark had kept his world small and manageable. No risks, no big moves, just enough to keep the roof patched and the lights on. So when the old city playground went up for auction, nobody expected him to raise his hand. The notice had been stapled crooked to the post office bulletin board. City property auction, lot number 47, playground, Maple and 9th. Minimum bid $1. It wasn't even supposed to be a real auction. Just a technicality to offload dead space. The town couldn't afford to maintain it, and most folks wanted it torn down and replaced with more parking. But that rainy Thursday afternoon, Mark and Ellie walked past it on the way home from daycare. The wind howled through the rusted jungle gym. An old teeter-totter swayed like a broken seesaw on a ghost ship. A plastic dinosaur had graffiti sprayed across its belly. "Was this ever fun?" Ellie had asked again, her voice almost lost in the wind. Mark hesitated. "Yeah, a long time ago, before it broke." Her little fingers gripped the chain-link fence. "Can we fix it?" He should have said no. He should have made up some excuse. Instead, he knelt beside her, brushed a wet strand of hair from her face, and said softly, "Maybe." The auction happened the next morning in the cold basement of City Hall. 3 real estate guys in puffy vests sipped coffee in the back row, waiting for bigger fish. Nobody bid on the playground. Nobody except Mark. "Lot 47, the clerk called out. "Opening at $1. Do I hear one? $1? 1. Mark's hand went up. 170. People turned. The clerk raised an eyebrow. "You want to bid 170, not $1.70, right?" Mark nodded. "No, I mean 170. Someone chuckled. One of the real estate guys whispered, "What's he buying? Scrap metal?" The clerk banged the gavel. "Sold, lot 47, to Mr. Reynolds." That was it. No applause, no camera crews. Just a single dad with calloused hands and a 5-year-old daughter who saw a kingdom in the ruins. The place was worse than he remembered. The mulch was moldy and sour. The metal bars were chipped with rust. The swing chains screeched like tortured hinges, and someone had used the merry-go-round as a makeshift fire pit. But Ellie? Ellie danced through it like she was walking into Disneyland. She climbed a toppled slide like it was Everest. She named a mud-soaked bench the Queen's Throne. And Mark, exhausted from overtime, hands blistered from clearing brush, couldn't stop himself from smiling. They started small, a borrowed rake, a few cans of spray paint, a toolbox Mark hadn't touched in years. Each night after work, he came with Ellie to sand and patch and repaint. Neighbors walked by and stared. Some smiled, some shook their heads. "Don't know why you're wasting time," one said. "No one plays outside anymore." Mark didn't answer. He just hammered another bolt into the base of the seesaw and said to Ellie, "Hand me the wrench, baby." One week in, someone left a note, tucked into the chain-link fence. Just one line, written in pencil. "Used to bring my son here, thank you." Mark held the note like it was made of gold. That night, he told Ellie, "You know, some people miss this place too." She looked up from her coloring book. "Maybe we can help them remember." He didn't have the heart to tell her he still didn't know how they were going to finish this. The monkey bars were bent. The main slide was cracked clean through. The merry-go-round needed welding, which he couldn't afford, and the wooden border along the perimeter, termite-ridden and rotten. But Ellie didn't see problems. She saw possibilities. And maybe that's what made this more than a fix-it project. Maybe that's what made it something bigger than just a dad trying to rebuild a playground. By the third weekend, the changes were impossible to ignore. The grass was trimmed. The old swings were replaced with thick black chains and solid wooden seats Mark cut himself. Ellie painted them sky blue with stenciled clouds. A local mom pushing a stroller stopped by us. "Did the city fix this?" Mark shook his head. "Just me and her." The woman smiled. "Looks amazing, thank you." He didn't know it yet, but she'd post about it on the town's Facebook group that night, with pictures and a caption that would say, "This dad and daughter just brought our childhood playground back to life. Hero dad stories in real life." That phrase caught on. A week later, someone dropped off a pack of snacks and water bottles labeled, "For the hero, dad, and princess of the park." Ellie loved it. She twirled and said, "We're famous now." Mark laughed. But deep down, he started to believe maybe, just maybe, they were building something that mattered. But the big turning point came when they pried open the old ticket booth near the front. Buried under dust and rotting wood was a small, rusted compartment built into the sidewall. Inside, a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth. Mark unwrapped it and found an old maintenance ledger. Handwritten, faded ink, pages full of names, phone numbers, dates. At the top, Founder's Circle. The park wasn't just a playground. It had once been a passion project, built by volunteers in the late 70s, funded by bake sales, veterans clubs, and church potlucks. Each swing and slide had been donated, every tree planted by hand. Mark flipped to the last page. A single name stood alone. G. Reynolds. Ellie's eyes lit up. "That's our name." Mark's heart stopped. He stared at the name, then the date beside it, May 14th, 1981, his own birthday. Couldn't be a coincidence. He didn't say much after that, just closed the ledger and looked around the park in a different way. It wasn't just a fixer-upper anymore. It was his family's legacy, a dream his own father, who left when Mark was just a kid, might have started but never finished. Maybe it was up to him to finish it now. They stayed late that night. Ellie swung higher than ever. The stars blinked above them. Mark sat on the edge of the sandbox, watching the wind dance through the trees. He didn't have a big plan, no GoFundMe, no construction crew, just some tools, a ledger of forgotten names, and a daughter who believed in magic. And maybe that was enough. If you believe in second chances, in good dads doing quiet work that matters, stick around. This story's just getting started. Subscribe now to Hero Dad Stories and follow what happens when a forgotten playground becomes the beating heart of a whole town again. There's something different about a father working side by side with his kid. Not for money, not for a paycheck, but for something they believe in. That's what Mark told himself the third week after buying the broken playground. The days blurred together. After long shifts unloading feed trucks or stacking pallets, Mark would swing by the corner of Maple and Ninth with Ellie in tow. She'd hop out of the truck in her paint splatter. It's like she was clocking into a real job. They made a routine of it. Ellie would start by gathering the scattered soda cans, candy wrappers, and cigarette butts into a big black trash bag. Mark would roll out his toolbox, squinting into the lowering sun like some small-town mechanic fixing a ride that couldn't run anymore. Except it was starting to run, slowly, like a forgotten machine coming back to life. Mark rebolted the teeter-totter, cut fresh boards for the broken bench, and even hand-sanded the jagged edge of the metal slide. Ellie, proud of her artistic vision, had a thing for colors, bright, bold, joyful ones. She painted the swing set blue, added clouds in white, and even put rainbow stripes down the base of the climbing dome. They started calling the place Rainbow Park. Not officially, of course. There were no signs, just Ellie's voice echoing, "Dad, help me with the rainbow slide," or, "This bench needs more yellow. It's too grumpy." It wasn't just about making it pretty. Ellie understood that kids needed to feel safe, that if the place looked like it mattered, it would matter. Her 5-year-old brain didn't put it that way, but Mark understood. What surprised him most was how the town began to notice. At first, people just slowed down when driving by. Then they started parking. A woman pushing a stroller came by one evening, pausing at the edge of the gravel. "This place looks different. Are you with the city?" "No," Mark replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Just fixing it up." "With your daughter?" He nodded. She smiled. "That's really something." She came back 2 days later with her toddler. Then a young couple walked their dog through the gate. Then 3 kids from the nearby apartments started coming after school, one with a soccer ball, one with a juice box, and one with a skateboard that had clearly seen better days. Mark wasn't trying to start anything, but something was starting. One night, Mark found something strange under the mulch by the sandbox. He'd been leveling out the ground, pulling weeds and smoothing down new wood chips when his rake hit something solid. He got down on his knees, brushed the dirt away with his hands, and unearthed what looked like a flattened brass plaque. He pulled it free. The lettering was worn, but still readable. "In memory of Joy, may this always be a place for it. Dedicated by the founders, 1981. Mark sat back on his heels. He didn't know what to do with that plaque, so he wiped it off and slid it into the bed of his truck. That night, he lay awake thinking about it. 1981, the same year listed in the ledger he found, the same year his father's name had appeared. His dad had never talked about community work. Hell, his dad hadn't talked much at all before leaving for good. But the signs were adding up. Maybe this place had once been something sacred, something built with real sweat and hope. Maybe that's why Ellie loved it so much. Maybe some part of his family had always belonged here, even if he didn't know it. The next week, a retired high school janitor named Dwayne showed up with a power washer. "I saw your little girl painting," he said, gesturing toward the blue swings. "Thought you could use some backup." Mark chuckled. "You sure? There's a lot of grime." Dwayne just smiled. "Son, I've been fighting grime since '78. Together, they scrubbed the old jungle gym back to red paint and stubborn rust. Ellie painted daisies on the base. Someone left a bag of fresh mulch by the gate. Someone else brought a box of bottled water with a note. Keep going." By early April, Rainbow Park didn't just look alive. It felt alive. You could hear it from blocks away. Laughter, footsteps on gravel, the occasional creak of a swing or screech of a wheelbarrow. Mark bought a used picnic table off Craigslist, and Ellie added handprints in every color along the sides. Every now and then, Mark caught himself watching, not the playground, but the people, the small kindnesses, the way a mom tied a stranger's kid's shoelace, the way two teenage boys offered to hang a new rope ladder on the climbing tower, even though they were probably too old to use it. He realized this place was becoming more than just a patch of land. It was a gathering point, a reason to stop scrolling, get outside, and be human together again. And yet, not everything was sunny. One afternoon, Mark caught two teenagers trying to tag the freshly painted merry-go-round. He didn't yell, just walked up quietly and asked, "You know what this used to be like?" They shook their heads. He told them about the fire pit, the broken glass, the forgotten bones of a park nobody wanted. Then he pointed to Ellie, swinging in a pink hoodie, laughing. "Ma, ani non kudi," laughing with her whole face. "You want to wreck that? Go ahead. But just know you're not wrecking my work. You're wrecking hers." The two boys stood quiet for a long beat. Then one of them said, "Sorry, man," and they left. Mark didn't see them again. But the next morning, someone had used black paint to cover the tag. And someone had also left behind a small bag of zip ties and new screws for the fence gate. One evening, Ellie brought something new to the park, a shoebox labeled Ideas. She placed it at the front entrance and taped a sign on it. "Tell us what would make this park even better." Mark rolled his eyes but didn't stop her. A few days later, they opened it. Inside, 27 crayon drawings, 9 handwritten notes, and a single $5 bill folded inside a sticky note that said, "For swings." They laughed, cried too. It was working. Rainbow Park was real now. It belonged to the town again. Then as spring warmed the trees, a package arrived at Mark's home. No return address, no label, just a thick manila envelope with a single word written in pen. Continue. Inside were 5 8x10 photographs. All black and white, all clearly taken in the early '80s. The playground, brand new, fresh paint, kids laughing. A small wooden plaque that read Founder's Circle. And in the final photo, standing beside the merry-go-round, arms crossed and proud, was a man who looked hauntingly familiar. Mark studied it closely, the nose, the jawline, even the belt buckle. It was his father, long before the drinking, before the job losses, before the silence. This park had been his dream too. Mark didn't say anything to Ellie that night, but when she asked if they could start fixing the broken water fountain, he nodded and added quietly, "Yeah, sweetheart, I think we should." And so the story of Rainbow Park kept unfolding, not in press releases or online campaigns, but in paint cans and old memories and brand new footprints in the sand. The kind of story small towns forget until someone shows up with a wrench, a rainbow, and a reason to believe again. The first real crowd showed up on a Sunday morning. It started with just one family, a young mom pushing a red stroller, her toddler barely old enough to waddle. She walked through the open gate, took one look at the fresh mulch and bright blue swings and said, "This can't be the same place." Mark nodded, a little shy. "We've been working on it." The woman smiled and let her little boy out of the stroller. He made a beeline for the mini slide, squealing with that high-pitched joy only toddlers can get away with. By the time Mark finished raking out the gravel path near the bench, 2 more families had wandered in, one with a jump rope, another with juice boxes, and half a dozen kids ranging in age from toddler to almost teenager. By noon, there were 20 people in Rainbow Park. Some stood under the shade trees talking, Others chased after their kids or sat on the repainted picnic table Ellie had decorated with tiny flowers. Mark stood back, quietly amazed. Ellie, of course, was right in the middle of it, helping a younger girl climb the ladder to the dome, handing out sidewalk chalk, giggling as a dog stole someone's ball and refused to give it back. He couldn't believe it. All the quiet nights, the slow repairs, the lonely scraping and painting, it had somehow turned into this. And yet it wasn't loud or chaotic. It was peaceful, even joyful, the way a playground was supposed to be. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the row of oak trees and shadows stretched across the sandpit, Mark noticed something odd. Taped to the inside of the old park gate was a flyer, neatly printed, bold type, a small photo of the playground. At the top it said, "Come see the new Rainbow Park, free fun for families." Below that, swings, slides, art wall, picnic space, now open thanks to one local dad and his daughter. Mark pulled it down and turned it over. No name, no signature, no contact info. He looked around. The families had begun to trickle out. Ellie was chasing bubbles with two other kids. Nobody seemed to be watching him. Someone had made this. Someone had gone to the trouble of designing and printing flyers, but hadn't told him. A little uneasy, he folded the flyer and put it in his pocket. Maybe it was just a nice gesture. Maybe someone from the neighborhood felt inspired. Or maybe, just maybe, someone else had a stake in this park. The next morning, he found another flyer. This one was pinned to the corkboard at the diner downtown, right next to the lost cat posters and the bingo night announcement. Two more were posted outside the library and the post office. By Thursday, the local middle school had shared a Facebook post with photos of Rainbow Park, encouraging students to help volunteer on weekends. The caption read, "Real change happens when one person decides something is worth saving." Mark had no idea who was behind it. And oddly enough, he didn't mind. For the first time in years, something was growing around him, and he didn't need to control it. He just needed to keep showing up, tools in hand, heart open. That weekend, an older man arrived just after sunrise. Mark was already there, tightening the bolts on the repaired seesaw, when he saw a brown pickup roll up to the curb. The man who stepped out was in his 70s, maybe older, tall and wiry, with silver hair under a faded Marine Corps cap. He didn't say a word at first, just walked the perimeter of the park, slowly, as if counting steps or retracing old memories. Then he stopped at the merry-go-round and just stared at it. Long enough that Mark finally walked over and said, "Morning, sir, you okay?" The man nodded, clearing his throat. "I welded that, back in '79, me and my brother." Mark blinked. "Seriously?" "Yeah, it was our Eagle Scout project. This whole park used to be a service project zone. Scouts, churches, VF, community stuff. You'd be amazed how many Saturday mornings were spent pouring concrete here." The man rubbed his hand over the top bar of the merry-go-round. "Didn't think I'd ever see this thing again. Thought it got scrapped." Mark smiled. "We almost did scrap it, but it still spins." The man chuckled. "That's something." They talked for 20 minutes. His name was Walt. He used to live 4 blocks away, raised 2 kids who learned to ride their bikes on the path around the sandbox. After his brother passed, he stopped coming. Eventually moved across town, but something had pulled him back. "I saw one of those flyers," Walt admitted, tapping the corner of his cap. "Figured I'd see it one last time." Mark offered him coffee from a thermos. They sat on the bench Ellie had painted with stars, watching the town wake up. Walt didn't stay but before he left, he handed Mark an envelope with 3 $20 bills inside, for paint or snacks or whatever you and your little girl need. Then he climbed into his truck and drove away, gravel crunching under his tires. Mark stood still for a long time after that, not because of the money, but because it felt like a door to the past had opened. Just a crack. And he wasn't alone in remembering what this park used to mean. Later that week, while repairing the old jungle gym ladder, Mark spotted something stuck in the corner of the wood frame, a rusted nail holding a curled piece of paper, long faded and partially eaten by insects. He gently pulled it free. It was part of a newspaper article, yellowed with age, the top half still legible. "Community volunteers raise final beam at Maple Park, 1981. Among those present were local dads, teachers, and youth volunteers. The project, named the Founders Circle, was intended to give families a safe place to play and grow. The final tree was planted by George Reynolds, one of the original organizers." Mark stopped breathing for a moment. George Reynolds, his father, the same name listed at the top of the ledger. the same signature he vaguely remembered from his old Little League permission slips. He had been here. Mark turned the article over. On the back was a faded photo, blurry but recognizable. A row of men holding shovels, kids in overalls nearby, trees freshly planted behind them. Mark didn't recognize most of the faces, but the man second from the left, dark hair, strong jaw, crooked smile, it was him. No mistaking it. His dad had helped build this park, and now, decades later, Mark was rebuilding it without ever knowing. That night, Mark didn't talk much over dinner. Ellie chattered about a new friend she'd made and how she wanted to add a chalkboard wall near the swings. Mark nodded, distracted. After she went to bed, he poured himself a cup of coffee and stepped out to the porch. He stared out into the dark. He thought about legacies, about all the things a father could pass down without saying a word, about silence and wounds, and how sometimes healing begins not with confrontation, but with construction. Maybe his dad hadn't known how to be present, but maybe he'd tried just once to build something good. Maybe this park was the only thing he had left behind. And now it was Mark's turn. The next morning, Ellie skipped into the park and shouted, "Look, Daddy, someone painted the old tree." Sure enough, the giant oak near the back corner had been decorated overnight. Soft yellow ribbons wrapped around the base, a paper sign hanging from a nail. "Thank you, Rainbow Park. You're bringing us back." Mark didn't know who had left it, but he didn't need to. This was no longer just a renovation. It was a return. It was the kind of Saturday that felt like the world had exhaled. Sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the gravel with gold. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and blooming jasmine. Rainbow Park was alive with motion. Shoes crunching on wood chips, squeals from the tire swing, the hum of a dad trying to assemble a new basketball hoop while being helped by 3 6-year-olds. Mark stood near the old ticket booth, a rag slung over one shoulder, inspecting the wood paneling that had warped over the years. He'd been putting this off. The booth wasn't functional, but it was part of the original build. Ellie had grand plans for it. Maybe a lemonade stand, maybe a library shack, depending on the day. He pulled out his crowbar and started to pry open the side panel. The wood gave with a groan, dust puffing out like breath from old lungs. That's when he saw it. Wedged behind the frame, hidden beneath a dislodged plank, was a tightly bound bundle wrapped in wax cloth. His first thought was old blueprints. His second was mice. But when he pulled it free, the cloth crackled in his hands like dried leaves. Inside was a notebook, weather-stained but mostly intact, and a folded piece of heavy paper. The notebook was a maintenance ledger, handwritten, neat script, faded but legible. Across the top of the first page, Founder's Circle, Volunteer Ledger 1980 to 1983. Page after page listed names, dates, tasks. George R., mulch delivery, 5/3/81. W. Greer, built bench near North Fence, 7/12/82. Harriet and Dan P., painted jungle gym, 9/19/80. Mark sat on the bench and flipped through the pages like he was reading the guest book of a forgotten church. These weren't contractors. They were neighbors, families, teenagers, seniors. It dawned on him, this wasn't just a build site. It had been a movement. He unfolded the heavy paper tucked inside. A simple letter, handwritten in a steady, square hand. To whoever finds this, if you're reading this, it means the park is still standing, or at least being cared for. That means everything. We built this place with our hands. We weren't professionals. We just wanted to give kids somewhere to run and climb and imagine. We called ourselves the Founder's Circle. I don't know if anyone remembers us. That's okay. If you ever find yourself fixing this place up, don't do it alone. Bring others in. Let them see what it can be. Joy is contagious. GR. GR. He knew that signature now. It matched the one from the newspaper clipping. And it matched the memory, faint and fractured, of his dad signing a field trip form when he was 7. George Reynolds, his father. Mark sat on the edge of the sandbox for a long time that afternoon, watching Ellie use a sidewalk chalk bucket to draw a dragon along the walkway. She didn't know what he'd found. Not yet. It wasn't something he knew how to explain anyway. How could he tell her that the man she only knew from photos, the man Mark had long ago buried in silence, might have built the very slide she loved most? He thought about that letter, about don't do it alone, about bringing others in. He'd been trying to carry this park by himself with Ellie as his co-captain. But maybe this thing, this revival, was always meant to be shared, a ripple, a spark. On Monday, he made copies of the letter and the ledger pages and posted them inside the old ticket booth, now freshly scrubbed. He mounted the original letter inside a clear plastic sleeve and pinned it beside the new hand-painted park rules. He added a sign above it, in honor of the Founders Circle, 1980-1983. People noticed. They always did. Some read in silence. Others took photos. A few left sticky notes with their own names and years. Wendy G. painted the Dragon Tires, 1981. I was 10 when this place opened. Cried when they shut it down. This is beautiful. Jack W. One man returned later that evening with a tool belt and said, I've got Saturday mornings free. Tell me what needs doing. It wasn't a tidal wave, but it didn't need to be. It was momentum, and Mark could feel it building. That Friday, just after closing the park gate, Mark found another envelope in his mailbox at home. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single photo, a child's birthday party in the early 80s. Polaroid, faded corners, a cake, kids in overalls, balloons tied to a newly built picnic table. And at the edge of the frame, barely in it, was a young man in a flannel shirt, kneeling beside a painted slide, smiling. Mark stared at it for a long time. It was his father, younger than Mark was now, but it was him. The note on the back said, he was proud of this, more than you ever knew. Mark didn't know if it was meant to bring closure or open more questions. He didn't know who sent it or why now. But something settled in his chest. Not peace, not yet, but something close. The next morning, Ellie ran up with another new idea. Dad, let's make a memory wall. He blinked. A what? A wall where people can draw or write what they remember, from when they were kids, or even now. She was already dragging a cardboard box full of chalk and paint markers over to the old back fence. Mark helped her set it up. He posted a sign, Your memories matter, share a moment from Rainbow Park. By sunset, the wall was full. I kissed my first boyfriend by that tree. He's my husband now. My brother broke his arm on the monkey bars. He still talks about it. My mom used to pack us sandwiches and we'd sit on the hill every Sunday. Thank you for bringing it back. That night, Mark stayed behind, sweeping gravel and locking the front gate. He paused by the wall, reading the stories under dim light. One message, written in small, uncertain handwriting, stopped him cold. I wish my dad had stayed, but maybe he left something good behind after all. Mark didn't know who wrote it, but it felt like it had been meant for him. Later, sitting on his porch with a cup of black coffee, Mark opened the ledger again. He ran his fingers down the list of names. George Reynolds wasn't at the top, just somewhere in the middle, like he'd joined late or preferred to stand in the back. That felt right. His dad had always been a man of few words, quieter in a crowd. Maybe the park had been his one big act of love. And maybe rebuilding it was Mark's way of answering, years too late, but still right on time. By the time Sunday rolled around, the park had taken on a life of its own. A high school art class had started painting a mural on the inside of the fence. Scenes from old photos, stories from the memory wall, bits of rainbow winding through it all. Someone left fresh-cut flowers at the base of the original swing set with a note, for all the joy that started here. And Ellie? She now wore a park manager badge she'd made out of cardboard and string. She took her job seriously, handing out chalk, organizing cleanup buckets, and giving stern talks to any kid who littered. Mark watched her from the bench one afternoon, her curls bouncing as she ran, her laughter echoing like bells. This was no longer just about repair. It was resurrection. A strange envelope showed up on a Tuesday. Mark found it tucked between the pizza coupons and electric bill. No stamp, no return address, just his name, handwritten in blocky letters across the front. He stood on the porch steps for a minute, turning it over in his hands like it might bite. The paper was thick, the edges worn soft like it had been held and handled too many times. Inside was a single photograph, a black and white image of Rainbow Park from what had to be the early 1980s. Still new, still perfect. Swings freshly hung, mulch clean and undisturbed. A little girl in pigtails was flying down the slide, arms up, mouth wide open. Someone had captured it mid-laugh. On the back of the photo, in neat handwriting, just one line. Make it better than we did. That was it. No name, no explanation. Mark leaned against the porch post and stared out toward the trees across the road. A breeze picked up, rustling the leaves with that low hush that always made him feel like something unseen was listening. He didn't recognize the handwriting. Not exactly. But there was something about the shape of the letters, the steady way the T was crossed, the long tail on the Y. He set the photo on the table inside and didn't say a word about it for 3 days. Meanwhile, Ellie had moved on to her newest obsession, collecting stories. She'd turned the memory wall into a living journal. With a clipboard and a pink pencil, she now interviewed people who visited the park, asking them to share what they remembered from their childhood. Mark watched from a distance as she sat cross-legged on the sandbox edge with an elderly woman in a sun hat, nodding seriously and writing down everything she heard. The woman laughed, ruffled Ellie's hair, and pointed to the tire swing. "That one threw me clean into the bushes when I was 10, she said loud enough for Mark to hear. "Still got the scar." Mark smiled. Later that day, Ellie showed him her growing folder, Rainbow Park History by Ellie R. Inside were interviews, drawings, Polaroids, and even a couple of napkin sketches that people had done from memory. "This park's like a treasure map," she said. "Everyone has a piece." Mark knelt beside her. "You're doing something special here." She looked up at him. "So are you." That night, Mark finally pulled out the photograph again. He set it next to the old wet ledger, the letter from the ticket booth, and the newspaper clipping. Piece by piece, something was forming, like a picture only visible once you stood far enough back. Then he noticed something. On the bottom of the envelope, faint as a whisper, was an imprint, like someone had written on top of the envelope and left an indentation. He held it under the lamp, tilted it just right. 2 initials, Gr. George Reynolds, his father. He hadn't thought about his dad in years, not really. George had been a quiet man, almost too quiet. He kept to himself, came home late, and left early. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't gentle either. When he left for good, Mark was barely 12. No note, no explanation, just gone. There were whispers. Maybe a new life somewhere, maybe debts he couldn't pay. Maybe he just couldn't take the weight anymore. Mark never dug too deep. He'd built walls instead. But now those walls were shifting. If his dad had helped build the park, if he'd left behind that letter in the booth, if he had sent this photograph, then what else was hidden beneath the surface? 2 days later, Ellie came running up to him while he was painting the fence slats by the basketball court. "Dad, look!" She handed him a sheet of notebook paper, crumpled around the edges. "I found it under the picnic table. It was in a Ziploc bag." Mark unfolded it carefully. Written in the same blocky handwriting as the photo was another note. "You're doing right by them. I didn't finish what I started, but maybe you will. The ledger is yours now. The names matter. So do the stories." Check page 42. Mark's fingers froze. The ledger was still at home, tucked in a drawer by his bed. He hadn't thought to look at it page by page in a while. Most of the entries were routine. Who installed the fence posts? Who donated the mulch? Who bought paint? But page 42, that felt deliberate. That night, after Ellie had fallen asleep halfway through her library book, Mark sat down with the ledger at the kitchen table. He turned slowly through the pages, passing familiar names, half-faded ink, and yellowed corners. Page 42, his breath caught. At the top of the page, final phase plan, approved by GR. Beneath it, a diagram. Not professional, but detailed. A hand-sketched map of the park, nearly identical to the layout today, but with one key difference. There was a small structure marked in the back corner, behind where the climbing dome now stood, a square labeled Founder's Box, Vault 2 feet underground. And next to that, to be buried May 1983. Mark traced the lines with his finger, his heart beat faster. It wasn't just some time capsule. It was labeled Vault. Someone had made a plan to hide something, together with names listed at the bottom. George Reynolds, Walter Greer, Dan P., Harriet K. He recognized some of those names from the park wall, others from the old news clipping, but none of them had mentioned a buried vault. None, except his father, in a way. The next morning, Mark told Ellie they were going on a dig. She lit up instantly. "Like real archaeologists?" "Exactly," he said, packing a shovel and a small metal rake into the back of the truck. They walked to the park just after sunrise, before the other families arrived. He marked off the area behind the dome using the drawing as reference, then began to dig. The dirt was dry and packed. Roots crisscrossed through the first few inches. Ellie crouched beside him, brushing soil gently aside with her rake. They didn't speak much. It wasn't like digging for treasure. It was slower, stranger, like pulling memory out of the ground. 16 inches down, the shovel hit something hard. Mark knelt, cleared the dirt with his hands. A wooden box, sealed tight, stained dark from decades underground. He pulled it loose with a grunt and laid it on the tarp. Ellie watched wide-eyed as he pried open the lid. Inside, dozens of letters, Polaroids, folded drawings, one small tape recorder, a Boy Scout badge, a handkerchief with initials embroidered in blue, a film canister, and at the bottom, one manila folder sealed in wax. On the front, "If this is found, tell the truth of how it began. Let the park live again." Ellie whispered, "Is this from the people who built it?" Mark nodded slowly. "I think it's from all of them." He didn't open the wax folder. Not yet. Instead, he carefully repacked the contents, loaded the box into the truck, and drove it home. He set it on the dining table and stared at it like it was a sleeping animal. Some things inside might be personal, others public, but all of it mattered. Later that night, as the crickets chirped outside and the screen door creaked in the breeze, Ellie came to his side. "Are we going to tell people?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, but gently. "It's not just a story, it's theirs too." She nodded, curling up beside him. "Maybe it's like a puzzle, and we found the corner pieces." Mark smiled. "Exactly." And so the park's story shifted again, from fixing what was broken to uncovering what had been hidden. The people had come back. The laughter had returned. But now the truth would rise too. Quietly, carefully, and completely. The box sat on the dining table for 3 days before Mark could bring himself to open it again. Every time he walked past, he felt it staring back at him. Heavy with stories, memories, ghosts. The kind of ghosts that didn't rattle chains or slam doors, but whispered through the wood grain, waiting to be heard. On the 4th morning, he brewed a fresh pot of coffee, turned off his phone, and laid everything out. Ellie sat across from him in her pajamas, cross-legged, chin in her hands. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Ready." The first envelope he opened contained a set of Polaroids, faded, soft at the edges, but still clear enough to tell a story. Men pouring cement, women painting fences, kids holding cups of lemonade. Every picture showed hands working together. Every smile looked unposed, natural, real. There were newspaper clippings too, articles about bake sales, community drives, and the original dedication ceremony. And at the bottom of the stack, an old cassette tape in a clear case labeled Founders Meeting, May 10th, 1983. Mark stared at it for a long time before popping it into his old stereo. The tape hissed for a few seconds, then a familiar voice filled the kitchen. "All right, is this thing on? Testing 1, 2. We're gathered here tonight for the last official meeting of the Founders Circle. George, you want to say a few words?" Mark froze. The next voice, the rough, steady baritone, hit him like a punch. "I'm not much for speeches," the voice said. "You all know that, but I just wanted to say, this park isn't just swings and slides. It's proof. Proof that a few people with tired hands can still build something that lasts. We don't know what the town will look like in 30 years, but maybe a kid will find this place and remember what it felt like to be part of something good." Ellie looked up at her dad. "Is that Grandpa?" Mark nodded slowly, his throat tight. The tape clicked off a few minutes later. Silence filled the kitchen, thick and alive. For the first time in his life, Mark had heard his father's voice say something hopeful. Over the next few days, word spread about the discovery. At first, Mark hadn't planned to tell anyone, but Ellie convinced him. "It belongs to everybody," she said, holding the ledger like a treasure chest. "Not just us." So they invited a few of the older residents, the ones whose names appeared in the ledger, to the park that Saturday. Walt came first, wearing his Marine cap and holding 2 thermoses of coffee. Mrs. Harriet Pierce followed, walking slowly with a cane, but with eyes that still sparkled. They gathered under the oak tree near the fence, the wooden box sitting open on the picnic table between them. Mark played the tape again. The voices of their younger selves echoed through the park. Laughter, small jokes, the scrape of chairs, and finally George Reynolds' words, steady and sure. When it ended, no one spoke for a moment. Then Harriet wiped her eyes. "Your daddy was a good man, Mark. Hard-headed, quiet, but good. He wanted this park to outlive him. Guess he got his wish." Mark swallowed. "He never said anything, not to me." "Some men don't know how," Walt said gently. "Doesn't mean they didn't try." That afternoon, people came and went, curious to see the old photos and the box's contents. The story spread faster than Mark expected. Someone posted about it online. By evening, local reporters were calling. Mark didn't think much of it until the next morning, when a drone buzzed overhead and a woman in jeans and a leather jacket stepped through the park gate carrying a camera crew behind her. "Are you Mark Reynolds?" she asked. He wiped his hands on a rag. Depends who's asking. Laura Bennett, Channel 12 News. 12th News, she said, flashing a grin. We heard about your $170 miracle. Mind if we ask a few questions? Mark hesitated, but before he could answer, Ellie shouted from across the park. Dad, we're famous! Laura laughed. Guess that's a yes. The segment aired that night on the 6 o'clock news. Local dad revives forgotten playground and uncovers hidden legacy. It showed clips of the park before and after, interviews with kids, parents, and even Walt, who told the camera, this man brought back a piece of our town's soul. Mark didn't think much of it. He'd seen local stories come and go, feel-good moments forgotten by next week. But this one didn't fade. By the following weekend, strangers were showing up from nearby towns, bringing paint, wood, snacks, even playground parts. One retired welder drove 3 hours to fix the old merry-go-round. A local lumberyard donated planks for a new fence. The Rotary Club offered to sponsor maintenance. Someone started a donation drive online, calling it the Rainbow Revival. Mark's quiet little project had turned into a community movement. At first, it overwhelmed him. He'd never asked for help, hadn't even known how. But as the days passed, he realized something unexpected. The more people came, the more complete the place felt. It wasn't just about rebuilding anymore. It was about remembering together. One morning, while installing new benches, a woman approached him carrying an old photo album. She introduced herself as Margaret Pierce, daughter of Harriet. I thought you might want to see these, she said, opening the album to a picture of a younger George Reynolds, laughing beside a pile of lumber. Mark leaned in. That's him. Yeah, she said softly, you have his eyes. He didn't know what to say. For years, he'd avoided that kind of comparison, but this time it didn't sting. It felt okay, like a thread stitching itself back into place. By the end of spring, Rainbow Park was unrecognizable. New swings, fresh paint, a brand new sign carved by a local carpenter. Rainbow Park, established 1981, reborn 2024. The grand reopening drew half the town. Kids chased bubbles through the air. A local band played soft country tunes from the gazebo. Someone grilled hot dogs near the parking lot. Mark stood off to the side, holding a cup of lemonade, trying to take it all in. He could hear Ellie's laugh ringing above the noise, pure and bright. She was helping a little boy tie his shoe near the slide. Her hair lit up in the sun. For the first time in a long while, everything felt right. Then through the crowd, he saw a face he hadn't seen in 20 years. A man in a dark jacket stood near the fence, hands folded, eyes fixed on the playground. Older now, thinner, but unmistakable. George Reynolds. Mark's breath caught. He blinked, half expecting the image to vanish. But it didn't. The man walked closer, step by careful step, until they were only a few feet apart. Neither spoke at first. Finally, George cleared his throat. You did good, son. The words were simple, but they cracked something open inside Mark. You're real, he whispered. George smiled faintly. Last I checked. Mark's hands trembled. Where have you been all these years? George looked down. Trying to fix what I broke. Just didn't realize I had to come home to finish it. He glanced around the park. The laughter, the color, the life. I saw it on the news. Heard your name. Figured maybe it was time. Ellie appeared beside them then, clutching her clipboard. She looked from Mark to George. Dad, who's this? Mark knelt down, voice shaking. This is your grandpa. George's eyes softened. He knelt too, taking in the little girl with the same blue eyes his son had carried all his life. You like it here, kiddo? He asked. Ellie grinned. It's my favorite place in the world. George nodded. Mine too. The three of them stood there for a long while, the park alive around them. No big speeches, no apologies carved in marble, just quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. The kind that comes when something lost finally finds its way back. Later that night, after the crowd had gone and the park lights flickered off one by one, Mark walked the perimeter with his father. They stopped by the bench near the oak tree, the same one George had helped build 43 years earlier. I was scared, George said. Back then, thought I wasn't enough. Thought leaving might save you from me. Mark's jaw tightened. You were wrong. George nodded. I know. Silence stretched between them, soft and heavy. Then Mark sat down. But you left something behind that didn't break. This place. George smiled, eyes glistening. Guess we both needed to fix it, huh? Guess we did. When dawn came, Mark and Ellie arrived early. They found the old man already there, sitting quietly on the bench with a coffee cup and a newspaper. Ellie climbed onto the swing and called out, Grandpa, watch this. George raised his cup. I'm watching. And as the swing arced higher into the golden morning, Mark realized the park had given him more than he ever expected, more than he'd even dared to want. It had given him a place to belong, a bridge between what was broken and what could still be mended, a second chance. Spring melted into summer, and Rainbow Park felt like it had always been there, reborn, but with roots that ran deeper than anyone realized. Every corner held a story now. The mural wall was covered in memories and handprints. The old ticket booth had been turned into a mini library, Ellie stocked with donated books and a sign that read, "Take one, leave one, share your favorite story." And near the back fence, the founder's ledger was mounted in a weatherproof case under a plaque that read, "What they started, we continue." People came from neighboring counties just to walk the loop, let their kids play, and hear the story about the $170 bid that saved the park. But for Mark, it was never about the press or the headlines. It was about sitting on the bench with his daughter and watching her laugh without fear. It was about knowing the ghosts that once followed him had names. And now, peace. George Reynolds became a quiet, steady fixture in the background. He never tried to reclaim anything. He just showed up, with tools, with coffee, with a willingness to listen. He and Ellie built a birdhouse together and hung it from the same oak tree he'd helped plant 4 decades ago. She liked to joke that it was Grandpa's second project. And when the town announced plans to throw a Founders Day ceremony honoring the past and present contributors to Rainbow Park, George said he didn't want to make a speech. Mark didn't either. But that didn't stop the people from coming. The ceremony took place on a warm July afternoon. A white tent flapped gently in the breeze. Folding chairs filled with families, old-timers, high school volunteers, and toddlers with ice cream on their shirts. The mayor stood at a podium set up near the main gate, flanked by the new mural and the restored merry-go-round. Mark stood beside Ellie in a crisp blue button-down. His hands were calloused, his posture humble. George stood a few steps behind, wearing the same Marine Corps cap he always did, eyes shaded, expression unreadable. The mayor spoke first, recalling the original ribbon cutting in 1981. Then came Walt, who gave a short but moving tribute to the original builders, most of whom were no longer alive. Finally, the mayor turned to Mark and gestured for him to come up. He hesitated, but Ellie nudged his hand. "You have to, Dad," she whispered. "This is your park, too." Mark stepped forward, cleared his throat, and looked out over the crowd. "I'm not much of a speaker," he began, echoing the words his father had once said on that old cassette tape. That got a few chuckles. "I didn't set out to do anything special. I was just a single dad with a kid who saw something beautiful in a bunch of rusted swings and overgrown weeds. And I guess I just followed her lead." He paused. This park was never about one person. It was always about all of us. Everyone who showed up, picked up a paintbrush, fixed a bolt, brought a bottle of water, or just sat on a bench and remembered what it used to feel like to be a kid. He turned slightly, catching George's eyes for a moment. "Some people build things with their hands, some with their words, some just by being present. I think we need all three." Then looking at Ellie, "And some people build something just by believing it matters." The applause started small but grew. It wasn't loud or showy, just honest. Mark stepped up to back down and wrapped his arm around Ellie's shoulder. She leaned into him, beaming. That night, the park glowed under string lights and soft music. Families laid out blankets, kids caught fireflies, and George stood beside the newly installed Founder's Bench, where the original vault had been buried. The plaque beside it read, "To those who believed in joy, you were right." Mark and George sat quietly side by side as Ellie danced barefoot in the grass nearby, spinning under the lights like she was part of the sky. "Did you ever think it'd turn out like this?" Mark asked. George gave a quiet laugh. "I thought we'd plant a few trees and maybe fix a few old memories. I didn't know we'd be starting something bigger." "You regret leaving?" Mark asked, not bitter, just tired of avoiding the question. George's face hardened for a moment, then softened. "Every day," he said, "but you gave me a chance to come back. Most people don't get that." Mark looked down at his hands. "Most people don't deserve it." George nodded slowly. "Maybe, but sometimes life doesn't give you what you deserve. It gives you a shot at redemption, if you're lucky." They sat in silence a while longer. Then Mark said, "We're lucky." George looked up at the lights. "Yeah, I think we are." Before the crowd left, Ellie handed out envelopes she'd made. Inside each one was a drawing, a thank you note, or a memory someone had written on the park wall. One older woman opened hers and found a sketch of a slide and aesthetic figure with gray curly hair. The caption read, "This is you having fun again." She smiled through tears and hugged Ellie tight. Later that week, the town council voted to make Rainbow Park a protected landmark. Maintenance funds were secured. A time capsule was placed beneath the new memory wall, this time with photos and letters from the current generation of volunteers. Ellie placed the last item inside, her Rainbow Park history folder, now thick with stories and sketches. She kissed the cover and whispered, "For whoever finds this next." Mark stood behind her, quiet, watching. It wasn't just a park anymore. It was proof of what could be built, rebuilt, remembered, forgiven. The following Sunday, Mark and George walked the park together. No event, no ceremony, just the two of them, boots crunching over gravel, shoulders easing in the summer warmth. They passed the bench where George had once knelt to bolt in the base, where Ellie now read books to smaller kids under a sun umbrella. They reached the swing set, still painted sky blue with Ellie's original clouds still holding strong. George looked at his son. "You finished what I started." Mark shook his head. "We finished it together." They didn't say anything more. They didn't need to. When Ellie came running to them a few minutes later, out of breath and glowing with excitement, she pointed toward a young couple standing at the park gate with a baby in a stroller. "They just moved here," she said. "And guess what? They've never seen this park before." Mark smiled. "Then I guess it's their turn to fall in love with it." Ellie grabbed his hand and pulled. "Come on, Dad, let's give them the tour." And just like that, the story kept going. Thank you for following this journey, from a forgotten playground and a $170 dream to a legacy rebuilt and reborn. This story was never really about swings or slides. It was about healing, hope, and second chances. Now we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever returned to a place that meant something to you as a child? Or is there a place in your community that could use a second chance, just like Rainbow Park? Let us know your thoughts, because maybe, just maybe, someone out there is waiting for you to start the first brushstroke.